Although I was an immigrant, I was in the German, I was very active, just like any other German feminists and so on. So I thought, like, if I'm working here a lot, then I should go back to my country, and my country needs me much more. Well, as I was in Berlin, of course, I was following the news, and I was sometimes coming to Turkey. A feminist movement started, a feminist activist movement that started, what we call the third wave women's movement in Turkey. It was at the time called the radical feminist movement, in a rather negative tone. Thank God that's not anymore. Um, it was very exciting because I was in Germany in the feminist movement, in the international feminist movement, and I was trying to keep contact with friends here. Probably what the most exciting with the new feminist movement was that for the first time there was a feminist criticism of Kemalism, of the Kemalist ideology. That because there was a myth in Turkey that it's Mustafa Kemal and his friends, the fathers of the republic, who have given in quotations, women their rights, which was a big myth. I mean, actually, the first feminist movement started back in the 19th century in Turkey. There were a lot of Ottoman women. They were bringing out feminist magazines, newspapers, etc. But probably even more important than that, so it was the women themselves who got their rights. They weren't given their rights. But even more important, Shirin Tekeli, who's a very important figure whom I respect a lot, one of the first feminists one of the first feminist activists in Turkey of the third wave movement. She wrote a book criticizing the Kemalists, that actually their main aim was not to give women's rights, I mean, not gender equality. Their main aim was just to strike at the hegemony of the Ottoman Empire. So by establishing a secular system with women's rights on paper, at least, okay, and the legal sphere, they were actually trying to cut back the ties to the Ottoman Empire, where there was a Sharia, parallel. Actually, it's not only Sharia. We also had the Jewish family law, the Christian family law. So they took women as a symbol of their wish for secularism, or their will for secularism. I thought it's weird that people can still say with pride our civil code is adapted from the Swiss civil code. Because yes, it's true that it's adapted from the Swiss civil code, but the husband, according to the Turkish civil code until 2001, as we did the reform, the husband was the head of the family. So all European countries have long changed their laws. I mean, there was no other place, like where in the West, in the Europe, where the husband was still the head of the family. So, but our civil code was like put in a refrigerator. It had never changed. Husband was still the head of the family. So that was really, instead of being ashamed, they still, they were still saying, there was still this discourse, we have European laws, okay? So I think the third wave feminist movement has been very, very influential, very significant in changing that, because they started criticizing this. We were not given our rights, and moreover, these rights are not at all sufficient. There is no gender equality in Turkey, not even on paper, because, like as I said, the civil code should have changed. Because once the husband is the head of the family, it affects everything. It affects every sphere. Like, women have to listen to her husband in terms of which school the children should go, where should the home of the family should be. So everything was the husband's decision. In terms of tax, like women were very much discriminated because because of the so-called family tax, with the husband and so on, because of economic reasons. So anyway, so that was how the feminist movement started. And I think it was that was, of course, another very important reason why I came back, because I saw that there was a feminist movement and we could work there. I have co-founded a similar initiative with 4 other friends in Germany on protection orders, because I was one of the places, I worked in many places in Germany as a feminist, but I also worked in the women's shelter for 4 years. It was an amazing experience. I mean, if you work in the shelter and in a cosmopolitan country city like Berlin, you have hundreds and hundreds of women coming from all over the world, and how similar the dynamics of domestic violence is, no matter if they're educated or not. So as I was working in the shelter, I think it was like after 2 years, I suddenly came upon the idea, hey, this is crazy. I mean, like in the shelter, we're working and working, but it's like Sisyphus. It's like the Sisyphus work. You know, I mean, like let's say we help 50 women, 500 more are coming. So we shouldn't. So the issue is not only helping women who experience violence, but the issue is stopping violence. You know, helping women themselves to stop the violence before they come to the shelter. So I started a research. So at the time, it seemed that the best solution would be protection orders. So anyway, so that initiative was very successful, and then we managed. So there was a project. We call it an example. You know, I mean, just sorry. There was a pilot project to establish that law. I mean, to do research first and how the law should be written, etc. So that was the time when I came to Turkey. So of course, because I've been so active in Germany on that, I started the same initiative as soon as I came back. If that we could have a similar protection order in Turkey. That was, I think, a very significant experience for me for the civil code issue, because immediately after I started working on the initiative for protection orders in Turkey, there was a government change. For the first time in the Turkish history, there was a Islamist party, the Welfare Party, in a coalition government with Tansu Çiller. Well, we had Tansu Çiller, a woman prime minister, but she was no help at all for women. I mean, she wasn't at all interested in women's issues. So we had the Welfare Party plus Tansu Çiller, and there was no support. I mean, it was very clear that there was no support at all from the government for the law. But what was positive was that several people in the ministry, I mean, in the women's directorate, they were interested in having such a law because they were aware of the problem, but no support from the government. Well, the good thing was, so this is shocking for Turkey, okay? It's a secular country. You shouldn't say law is against Islam, but when it comes to gender issues, they were able to say it. Well, the good news was that as I was living in Germany, I think immediately after I left for Germany, actually, I had become active in the international feminist movement in Muslim societies. So I knew a lot of feminists from various Asian, African, and Middle Eastern Muslim societies, and I knew that Malaysia at the time had just passed protection orders. Okay, I mean, there's a lot of respect for Malaysia as a Muslim country. So I said, how come you say it's against Islam? Look at this. Malaysia just passed a law on protection orders. I should really see their faces. I mean, it really was like they said, really? Malaysia passed such a law? The people from the Welfare Party in the parliament said, yes, of course. So we immediately had the Malaysian law from Malaysia translated into Turkey. We said, here it is. You know, and with the official gazette on Malaysia and etc. That really stopped them. So it was a very interesting experience. I mean, so I had this confidence. Oh, okay. So we can even deal. You know, when religious arguments come, it is possible to argue and go on. Well, that was about the protection orders passed in 1998. This has been the first legal change after 1989. That is, in 1989, there was one article change, the Article 451, which said that women should take the permission of the husband to work. This was one of the first successes of the feminist movement. And another one, and a second article which had changed was the article reducing the penalty of rapists for rape in case the woman who's raped was a sex worker. Okay, so there was such an article 432 of the old penal code. So these two articles had changed, you know, as a result of the feminist movement. But there had been no other change for 10 years. In terms of the civil code, we thought that was not an issue at all because we thought that's the easiest. You know, I mean, the problem with the civil code is, as I've said, that the husband was the head of the family because there was no such thing in the West anymore. The law was incredibly old-fashioned, and moreover, based on an archival research, I found that the first proposal to change the law to have full equality in the civil code was back in the 50s, 1950s. So it was already 50 years was passed, okay? So we thought that's not a problem at all. You know, I mean, because the women's movement had been starting working on it since the 80s. So it was after so in 1999, but we didn't start it. It was already, as I've said, the first proposal was in the 1950s. The third wave feminist movement had started working on it since the 80s and so on. So we did, I think, what in WWHI, my organization, Women for Women's Human Rights, what we did was we did an international campaign, signature campaign, collecting signatures from women's organizations, human rights organizations all over the world. We sent it to the parliament. Then something for me incredible at this moment, it was really incredible for me, as the law finally came to the parliament, where we thought it's only bureaucratic, I mean, now it will pass. The Nationalist Action Party, which was also in the government, this was a coalition government at the time, led by Social Democrats and Nationalist Action Party, a small party, but nationalist, the smallest party actually in the coalition. They said, no, there's no way. And it was, this is important now because it was the government itself, because if the government doesn't want it, a law doesn't come to the parliament to be voted, okay? So it was their own government which had brought the law. We were afraid, we were thinking that it would be the welfare party, I've forgotten, was it the virtue party, because they keep changing, parties keep changing names in Turkey, whatever, I mean like the pro-Islamist party. We were afraid of them, but we thought because they were small, they didn't have so many seats, and the government was behind the law, we thought that there would be no problem at all. No. But I must also say that although on the forefront it was the Nationalist Action Party members, several other male members from other parties, including the Social Democrats, I would say, actually hid behind them. They were also against the law. Actually, they didn't support the law. But the Nationalist Action Party was the most vocal. Could you please explain to me what is the national threat? Because they were saying that this law is a national threat, it's a threat to the nation if we would have equality in the family. I said, I'm thinking I really can't understand what is the threat to the nation if women become equal to men, at least on paper, on law. I was really curious because I said, how come they're having this discourse of a national threat? So he told me I wouldn't understand anything, and I wouldn't know, as if like I were a child, I mean, that's the way they speak to you. And they said, you don't understand. A lot of men have mistresses in Turkey. So if you have this regime, a property regime, where in case of divorce, the property will be equally divided between the husband and the wife, then of course the wives would divorce their husbands because they knew that the man had a lover. But why should they then, I mean, it's a very interesting discourse. So it's literally saying, if you have this law, then the wives will understand us, then we can't discriminate against them, we can't abuse this law, so then they will divorce us. And I said, okay, what is the national threat yet in this? And then he said, well, then the mistresses will take a gun and shoot the wife because they don't want half of the property to go to the wife. Now imagine this conversation is happening in a parliament. In Germany, in the feminist movement, in the international feminist movement, and I was trying to keep contact with friends here. Probably what the most exciting with the new feminist movement was that for the first time there was a feminist criticism of Kemalism, of the Kemalist ideology. That because there was a myth in Turkey that it's Mustafa Kemal. Even more important than that, so it was the women themselves who got their rights. It wasn't, they weren't given their rights. But even more important, Shirin Tekeli, who's a very important figure whom I respect a lot, one of the first feminists, one of the first feminist activists in Turkey of the third wave movement. She wrote a book criticizing the Kemalists. Although I was an immigrant, I was in the German, I was very active, just like any other German feminists and so on. So I thought, like, if I'm working here a lot, then I should go back to my country, and my country needs me much more. Well, as I was in Berlin, of course I was, and his friends, the fathers of the Republic, who have given, in quotations, women their rights. which was a big myth. I mean, actually, the first feminist movement started back in the 19th century in Turkey. There were a lot of Ottoman women. They were bringing out feminist magazines, newspapers, etc. But probably following the news, and I was sometimes coming to Turkey, a feminist movement started, a feminist activist movement that started, what we call the third wave women's movement in Turkey. It was at the time called the radical feminist movement, in a rather negative tone. Thank God that's not anymore. It was very exciting because I was in the